Sumin eats rice almost every single day of her life. White rice at breakfast some mornings, always at lunch, always at dinner. If you added up her rice intake for a single week, it would outpace what most people following a low-carb diet in the West eat in an entire month. And her waistline hasn't moved in years. Not because she's counting anything, not because she's ever been on a diet in her life. According to the OECD, roughly 5% of adults in South Korea are classified as obese under the same standard used to measure obesity in the United States, where the number sits above 30%. Same starchy staple food, eaten at nearly every meal, in some cases eaten in larger quantities than the very diets built to avoid it. A completely different outcome for the body carrying it. So either everything the diet industry has told you about carbs for the last 20 years is wrong, or there's something happening at a Korean dinner table that has almost nothing to do with the rice itself and everything to do with what surrounds it. Here's the equation almost everyone believes without question. A carb is a carb, and eating more of them means storing more fat. It sounds like simple math. It's missing the one variable that actually decides where that food ends up, how sharply it spikes your blood sugar on the way in. Two people can eat identical meals, same rice, same calories, and one of them will send their blood sugar climbing fast while the other's barely moves. That spike, repeated meal after meal, day after day, is one of the biggest known drivers of fat stored specifically around the abdomen, the kind that wraps around the organs rather than sitting just under the skin. The good news is that spike isn't fixed by the food. It's shaped by how the food is eaten. 5 ordinary habits built into a Korean meal that quietly do exactly that. Habit 1. The meal starts with something warm, not the rice. Before rice is touched, there's almost always guk or jjigae on the table, a warm soup or stew sipped alongside the meal from the very first bite. This isn't a starter course to clear away before the real meal begins. It's part of the meal itself, present the whole time, spoon reaching for it between bites of everything else. Starting with warm liquid does 2 things at once. It fills the stomach with low-calorie volume, so the "I've had enough" signal arrives earlier than it would otherwise, before the rice bowl is even half finished. And the water and fiber suspended in it slow how quickly everything that follows, including the rice, gets absorbed into the bloodstream. Nobody's sipping soup first because they've read about blood sugar. It's simply how a Korean meal begins, generation after generation. The metabolic effect happens either way, whether anyone's thinking about it or not. Habit 2. Rice is never eaten alone. Look at a Korean table, and there's no single plate with a mountain of rice as the centerpiece and everything else pushed to the side. There's banchan, a spread of small side dishes, seasoned vegetables, fermented greens, a piece of protein, arranged around a modest bowl of rice. And the eating itself moves across the table. A bite of vegetable, a bite of protein, a little rice, back and forth, rarely more than a spoonful of any one thing in a row. Researchers at Weill Cornell Medicine tested this exact sequencing directly in a clinical setting and found that eating vegetables and protein before carbohydrates significantly blunted the after-meal blood sugar spike, even when the meal itself, down to the calorie, was identical. Same food, same portion. A dramatically calmer curve based on nothing but the order things entered the stomach. A Korean meal built entirely around small, alternating bites instead of one large mouthful of any single food is structured almost by accident to do exactly this, without anyone at the table ever having heard of the study. Habit 3. Something fermented sits on the table at nearly every meal. Kimchi, doenjang, the fermented soybean paste worked into the stew, pickled radish on the side, gochujang stirred through a dish. To most people at the table, this registers only as flavor, the sharp tang that cuts through the rice. To the gut, It's a daily delivery of live bacteria and the specific fiber that feeds them, arriving 3 times a day without anyone thinking of it as anything other than dinner. A well-fed, diverse gut microbiome is consistently linked in research to lower chronic inflammation. And chronic inflammation is directly tied to how readily the body holds onto fat around the abdomen rather than releasing it. Research out of Korea tracking large populations over time has linked regular kimchi consumption specifically to lower rates of abdominal obesity, independent of overall calorie intake. It isn't sold as a supplement in a capsule with a health claim printed on the label. It's been sitting quietly at the edge of the plate for centuries, doing the same job for free.
Habit 4. The rice bowl itself is small, and it's the same size every time. Traditional Korean rice bowls, called gongi, come in a standardized, genuinely modest size, and unlimited refills simply aren't the default, the way a bottomless breadbasket or a supersized side of fries might be elsewhere. This isn't a conscious portion control rule anyone consciously follows at dinner. It's just the size the bowl has always been, inherited without a second thought. Behavioral research on portion cues has shown again and again that people tend to eat closer to whatever quantity is placed in front of them than to what their body actually needs in that moment. Which means a bowl that was never oversized to begin with quietly removes a decision that, in a lot of Western meals, has to be made through willpower and self-restraint instead, meal after meal for an entire lifetime. Habit 5. The meal doesn't end with something sweet. There's rarely a dedicated dessert course built into an everyday Korean dinner, the way there often is elsewhere. Instead, meals frequently close with boricha, roasted barley tea, served warm, completely caffeine-free, with nothing added to sweeten it. In much of the world, the real metabolic damage of a meal isn't the meal itself. It's what comes immediately after it. A sugary drink or a slice of something sweet that spikes blood sugar right at the very end, with no fiber, no protein, and nothing left on the plate to slow that spike down. Replacing that final sugary note with an unsweetened warm tea means the calm, gentle curve the rest of the meal worked to build simply continues uninterrupted, all the way through to the next time anyone eats. None of these 5 habits ask anyone to eat less rice. None of them involve counting a single calorie or reading a nutrition label. They're not even framed as health habits inside Korean daily life. They're simply how a meal has always been built, generation after generation, long before anyone had a word for insulin response. Soup first to slow everything down, small alternating bites instead of one large portion. Something fermented, quietly working at the edge of the plate. A bowl that was never oversized to begin with, and tea instead of dessert to close the whole thing out gently. Sumin isn't thinking about any of this when she sits down to eat tonight. She's just having dinner, the same way her mother did and her grandmother before that. But the structure she grew up inside of is quietly doing something most modern diets spend years and considerable money trying to manufacture through restriction alone. If one of these 5 surprised you, tell me which one in the comments. I read every single one. And if this changed how you think about a plate of rice, there's a lot more of this waiting here. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.